2007. The Xbox 360 is dominating the gaming market, and it's the year of first-person shooters. Some of the biggest titles launched this year, such as the original Modern Warfare, Crysis, Halo 3, Team Fortress 2, and Half-Life 2 Episode 2. But in a year of predominantly critically successful sequels to well-known franchises, a new IP was born, which instantly became a cult classic. That game was Bioshock. Bioshock became an instant cult classic and changed what we learned to expect from a fast-paced first-person shooter. With an engaging dystopian world and wrapped in a mysterious story with some of the best twists seen in game storytelling. After 3 successful games, Bioshock disappeared into the void in March of 2013, and not much has been heard of it since. But why is it that this successful franchise and cult classic has gone radio silent on us? And what's even more important, should they even bring it back? The first Bioshock began development back in 2004 from the studio Irrational Games as a spiritual successor to their well-received but ultimately financially failing franchise System Shock, which was led by Ken Levine. The idea behind the game was to have a first-person shooter which set itself apart from others by not only having your standard shooting mechanics, but also giving you access to secondary abilities to use as projectiles while being set in this dystopian world with a grounded story told to the player through the environment and audio recordings. And for the most part, this is what we got. The first Bioshock has you playing a silent protagonist whose name is Jack, and finds himself in a plane crash in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The silent protagonist makes his way to a lighthouse which has a submarine in the middle of it and uses it to access the underwater city of Rapture. Jack is then quickly thrust into what seems to be a freakish nightmare as he makes his way through the torn down city of Rapture, with only his guidance being a man named Atlas who talks to him via a walkie-talkie. Jack must make use of the weapons he finds across Rapture, and also plasmas which give him the ability to throw electric bolts, fire, and many more from your hands. As you make your way through the city of Rapture, you constantly feel a sense of dread and loneliness, as the only other life you see are the inhabitants of Rapture who are erratic and crazed, and they attack you in swarms. Bioshock really set out and achieved its goal on relying on the environment to tell the story for you. There are no moments of exposition throughout the entire game, and you really feel as if you, the player, are trying to uncover the mystery of Rapture by listening in on conversations, observing markings and propaganda on the wall, and finding old audio recordings to piece together the horror of this underwater city. It was in the first title of this franchise that we were introduced to the now iconic Big Daddies, which roam across the map protecting what are called Little Sisters from the insane inhabitants called Splicers, and of course, you. The Little Sisters are probably one of the most talked about mechanics of the Bioshock series, as they have an actual effect on your character's abilities. Once you've taken down a Big Daddy, you are given the choice of whether you would like to harvest or free the Little Sister. If you choose to harvest the Little Sister, then you are able to use this to upgrade your character's skills at the cost of the Little Sister's life. But if you choose to save the Little Sister, you see her turn back to what looks like a normal girl. This serves as such an uncomfortable play mechanic, and is far from the only one given to you throughout your playtime with this game. As I said before, Bioshock's story is mostly pieced together by you, the player, and of course by Adam via walkie-talkie. By the time the credits roll and the true story has been unfolded, you'll have encountered many twists and turns which definitely take you by surprise and leave you with a twisted stomach over some of the moralities of the plot. Bioshock was pretty much a hit straight off the shelves with fans and critics alike, and racked up a handful of Game of the Year awards in 2007. Irrational Games and the mind behind it all, Ken Levine, were of course given the opportunity to begin work on a sequel which would again be set in Rapture. Irrational Games decided to not take the game, with Ken Levine saying, "The company understandably wanted another game in Rapture, but we felt we had said what we wanted to say about Rapture, about those kind of environments and that kind of feel. We want to scare the hell out of people, we want to shock people, but we didn't want to have any of those tools, the crutches, that we knew how to do that with." So the sequels passed onto a sister company of the publisher 2K, which was 2K Marin, and in 2010 we were given Bioshock 2 followed very closely in the shadow of its predecessor. Set 10 years after the events of the first game, Bioshock 2 has you play as the iconic Big Daddy known as Subject Delta, who has to find the little sister he must protect, otherwise he will die. Playing as the Big Daddy is definitely a thrill, but takes away from some of the fear and dread found in the first title, as once you're a few hours into the game, you can sometimes feel too overpowered for the Rapture's inhabitants who come running at you with lead pipes. You still have access to all the same abilities you had previously, as well as the same fast-paced shootouts. But one thing that feels vastly improved is the graphics and overall level of detail of Rapture. Even playing the game now, the water effects and overall artistic design have held up well over time. One thing that this sequel had to do was deliver a satisfying story with the same level of twists and turns which you encountered in the first game. And for me, I feel this is where the game fails most. The unnerving psychological plot moments never felt as if they came close to the payoff of the first game, and even though a lot of the overall game mechanics were the same, the use of environmental storytelling felt a lot weaker and not necessary to solve for yourself to be able to immerse yourself in the world of Rapture. Bioshock 2 was met with middle to high praise. It was obvious that this series needed to go back to the drawing board, as another game set in Rapture directly after this one would certainly not succeed. And it turns out these exact thoughts were going through the minds of Irrational Games. So the team of Irrational Games, again being led by Ken Levine, secretly began to work on a new project named Project Icarus. Project Icarus set out to take the Bioshock series to a new setting, far above the city of Rapture. And in 2013, we were given
Will the circle be unbroken by and by and by?
Bioshock Infinite really pulled out all the stops to define itself as the pinnacle of the franchise and lead the Bioshock franchise in a completely new direction. Infinite starts off with a familiar feel of location that's set 40 years prior to Bioshock 1, where you find yourself on a boat out in a stormy sea being taken to a lighthouse. Powered by a brand new graphics engine, Infinite immediately feels fresh, but retains the eerie art of the previous games for the opening. With the environment again being your main anchor for the story, relying only on your own initiative to make sense of the world you have found yourself in. But one thing that immediately sets Infinite apart from the previous games is that instead of a silent protagonist, you play as Booker DeWitt, who has his own voice and personality, which really adds another dimension to the storytelling, as you no longer feel like a lost wanderer, but an established character with a narrative and a goal. You were told at the very beginning of the game what that goal is. Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. This message is relayed to you throughout the game, and is definitely more of a tunnel vision approach as opposed to what came before it. And within a few minutes of starting the game, you are met with an immense feeling of awe. You are catapulted into the sky by a similar contraption as to what you were sent to in Rapture in the first game, but instead of an eerie underworld torn apart, your eyes are met with beauty and vivid colours in the cloud city of Columbia. Not a world which is tainted and dull, but a world that really wears its heart on its sleeve. With statues of idols and bustling streets, it's really a massive departure from what had come before, and immediately piques your intrigue more than Bioshock 2 ever did. Whereas Bioshock 1 and 2 felt more like they used subtle messaging to voice its agendas and deeper meanings, Infinite does not shy away from it in the slightest. From religious ideologies to racial propaganda, Infinite is bold in showing just how twisted its vibrant world is. As a result of the more up-to-date game engine, the combat feels much more fast-paced and refined. There are a wide range of weapons to choose from, as well as your special abilities, which are now named Salt, which give you abilities we are used to, such as shocking enemies or setting them alight, but also new ones, such as summoning a swarm of ravens to attack your foes. Another way the combat has evolved is the use of the skyhook. Not only is the skyhook an ample weapon to melee enemies, but you can use it to traverse the world of Columbia via skylines. This brings a whole new level of verticality to combat, resulting in some erratic gunfights. One of the most talked about features of Infinite is that of your AI companion, whose name is Elizabeth. Elizabeth is the girl who Booker must rescue and bring back to wipe away the debt, but she is by far a damsel in distress. Elizabeth aids you in combat by throwing you resources such as ammo, salts, and even money, which is a unique spin for an AI character, which I'm surprised we haven't seen more of in other games. Elizabeth also possesses her own set of unique abilities, with which she can open up tears in the world, which essentially act like portals, and you can use her ability to bring ammo supplies, medical supplies, and even skyhooks through tears in the world. This makes her feel more like an actual companion who is useful, as opposed to some stupid AI that stands in front of the enemy getting shot at. Of all three games, Infinite in my opinion is the best one, and that is mainly down to the insane story and plot development. It's definitely in my top 10 endings in video games, and it's something you need to experience for yourself to fully appreciate the level of complexity to the story. Infinite was received very highly by critics. The core fanbase of the Bioshock seemed quite divided over the new direction. Many took issue with the new direction of Infinite and what the ending means for future titles. Another core complaint was that of the main character Booker DeWitt. It seems that some fans prefer a voiceless character that you can mould into being your character, instead of a character which is already set in stone with an established background and motive. Despite this, Bioshock Infinite ended up being the most popular Bioshock entry, making up 11 million copies sold, whereas Bioshock 1 and 2 sold 13 million combined. It's now been 7 years since the release of Infinite, and there has not been much noise surrounding a new entry in the title. Early last year it was confirmed that a new entry into the Bioshock series was entering into the early stages of development. Like before, it is a game that has been requested by the publisher 2K, and again being led by a new studio, but without the mind behind it all, Ken Levine leading it. So when I heard that a new Bioshock game was in the early stages of return, but without Ken Levine leading it, I began to wonder, do I really want them to bring back Bioshock without the lead director who brought us not only one of the most revolutionary first-person shooters of 2007, but also completely blew us away again with Infinite 5 years later? As much as I want a new title into the series, I don't want another game that rides off the nostalgia of previous entries, with an overwhelming sense of being more of an expansion of the original story as opposed to a compelling sequel. And although one could argue that I'm coming to a conclusion based off very little facts and my own superstitions, we can't deny that in recent years we haven't seen multiple great IPs and franchises being destroyed at the helms of publishers and directors who just don't share the same amount of love and respect for the lore as the original creators do. It's all too common now to see rehashes of what we have seen before, with story writers not daring to expand on the established universe in fear of the fans retaliating due to the fact that they understand the lore better than they do. So do they bring back Bioshock? My answer is a conditional yes. A yes if the new entry takes the Bioshock franchise somewhere it has not been before, with an engaging story being the core element that ties the whole game together, while still being true to the original concept already established. But if this new Bioshock is set back in the underwater world of Rapture, having you play a nameless character or a big daddy, storming through the corridors and just mowing down enemies without a truly gripping story to drive your actions, I really don't want this series to come back. TGFL, signing out.